Dr. Efrat Sopher joins me, Chair of the Board of Advisors at the Ezri Center for Iran and Gulf States Research. Dr. Sopher, thank you for joining me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on.
Your thoughts, initial thoughts anyway, on on the ICC decision here?
My initial thoughts is I'm absolutely baffled that a prime minister, democratically elected prime minister of Israel, is being put on the same platform as Yahya Sinwar, who is the head of a prescribed terrorist organization. I think that underlines how this action under the International Criminal Court is politically motivated, and that the West shouldn't fall for these kinds of political ruses.
Separating the two off, because you're right, they are very different entities in nature. Separating the two off, it is still possible, isn't it, for an elected government to commit war crimes?
Well, broadly, yes, but I think upon further inspection, the Prime Minister Netanyahu, no matter what one thinks of his political leanings, is very far away from having committed any war crimes whatsoever.
It's worth saying, isn't it, that this investigation by the ICC was part of an investigation that predated October the 7th, obviously October the 7th, and its impact has been brought into its remit. It's important to say that, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you for commenting on that. I'll keep that brief because I know we invited you on to talk more about Iran and these events over the weekend. President Raisi and the foreign minister dead in that helicopter crash. Where does this leave? Because it's a strange power structure in Iran, isn't it? I mean, as I understand it, President Raisi was, in a sense, in line for the top job, supreme leader. So presumably there'll be lots of jockeying now, will there, for that?
There is indeed. And it's a bit of a tale of palace intrigue that we have here within the Islamic regime, where number one in the pecking order is the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Raisi, the president, was number two. So he was responsible for executing Iranian policy, and the supreme leader was called the actual policies. And the supreme leader is in his late 80s, and there is a race for succession now. And so the two main contenders were Raisi, who is no longer with us, and Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader's son. And so now, if we can see and we can make whatever kind of interpretations we want to out of that, is that Mojtaba does not have any rivals anymore.
And it's been interesting. I mean, my only knowledge of it since the weekend has been through social media of what I'm about to talk about. And you may be able to add some I'm sure you will be able to add wider context to that. Seeing lots of women in Iran celebrating, sometimes with great humour, actually, celebrating the helicopter crash because of the obvious oppression against women in Iran, of which Raisi was a very confident exponent, wasn't he?
Exactly. And so we've seen the women's movement has been very, very powerful, at the very least in the past 2 years. And I've watched developments in Iran, especially being led by the women overnight and 2 years before that. And the reason why the women are rejoicing is that Raisi, who's also known as the Butcher of Tehran, was responsible for calling for the killing and maiming and raping of countless women within the Mahsa Amini protests and before that. And so, yes, it is the women who are breathing a huge sigh of relief here. I mean, Raisi is estimated has the blood of about 30,000 Iranians on his hands.
And for people who might have forgotten Mahsa, what happened to her was that she was arrested for not supposedly wearing the right clothing and was beaten in custody and died a short time later. I mean, the bravery of the women who've gone on the streets to show their hair and, flout those rules. But it is astounding, isn't it, that they're still being dragged off the streets and harmed in this way for that reason.
It is astounding. And overnight, there were diktats issued out by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps inside Iran, warning Iranians and Iranian women they were warning them that all social media, all information was being carefully monitored. And a question may arise, why should we in the UK care what's going on in Iran? And I think we should be very mindful that the Islamic regime carefully watches what happens in the UK. And whenever there's instability inside Iran, the Iranian regime has a penchant for spreading instability outside its borders. And we've seen, as the MI5 has warned, as Tom Tugendhat warned, respectively in 22 and 23, is that the Islamic regime has been conducting plots and has been mapping dissidents within the United Kingdom. And so this is a danger that we should be aware of. And that's why it's important for our listeners and for us as British citizens to follow closely what is going on.
Going back to the helicopter crash, is there any suggestion, or from what you know of the regime and the pressures within it and outside of it, is there any suggestion that this might have been a deliberate act? So a tampering with the helicopter, or who knows? But was there any internal suggestion that he might be bumped off, so to speak?
The only explanation, so to speak, that I've heard of representatives of the Iranian regime and Iranian academics has been blaming the United States for its sanctions and saying that this is the reason why the helicopters weren't equipped with up-to-date equipment.
Right.
But one would but one would argue that the Iranians have been really adept at drone technology, at missile technology. So it's a bit far-fetched to think that they're technologically deprived in that way.
And also going back to what you were saying there about, why we in Britain should be concerned about it. I think at some level, at quite a central level, what we're seeing in Gaza and Israel is as much as anything about Iran and America, isn't it?
We are. So this is, you're quite right in saying that there's a much bigger regional context here, where it's not just Iran and America, it's Iran with Russia, possibly China as well, and the West. And this we see at play both in Russia, Ukraine, with Iranian missiles being used against the Ukrainians. It is, you're absolutely right in saying that this is a big, complex puzzle over here. And we've also seen it with Iranian proxy activity, that Iran has been sponsoring Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, which is why we should also be very concerned.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Efrat Sopher, for speaking to me today, Chair of the Board of Advisors at the Ezri Center for Iran and Gulf States Research.